If for any reason you're unable to hear any of us speaking throughout the presentation, if you sign out and then sign yourself back in, that sometimes helps. All of the information that we go through tonight is going to be recorded and put on the England Athletics website, so you'll be able to access it again. And we're also going to put together an FAQ document with all the questions and answers from today's session. We're going to go through all the questions that have been pre-submitted. For people that haven't submitted a question yet, but might have questions while we're going through, I would ask you to just type them into the chat box in the right-hand side, and someone will try and answer them. So what we're going to do as the presentation goes through, there'll be one person presenting and the others are going to pick up comments made in the chat box in the right-hand side. So any questions that you have when you go along, just write them in there. Like I said, if they don't get answered for any reason, just drop me an email afterwards, and we can pick that up afterwards. So who is here today? So my name's Nikki English. I'm Officials Development Officer at England Athletics. Some of you may know me or went to the webinar last Thursday. Luckily for you, you won't have to hear my voice much today. John Temperton, UK Domestic Competition Manager and UK Rules Group Administrator. Tim Souter, who's UK Rules Group Chair, and Peter Crawshaw, UK Rules Group Member. How the presentation is going to work, we're going to start off with going through the changes to the rule book. Then we're going to go through some of the questions and answers you've pre-submitted. And like I said, we're going to try and field questions in the chat box as we go through as well. So like I said, any questions, please put them into chat function. Because of the amount of people that we've got booked on the webinar, we aren't able to have it as a webinar where you can verbally ask questions, because it would be quite hard to manage. So that's the reason we're going to do that. Okay, so if I pass you over to Tim now.
Evening, everybody. Just a very short introduction from me. Firstly, thank you all for joining us this evening, giving up your time. I hope you're going to find it helpful. As Nikki said, any questions, whack them in the chat box, and we'll do our best to deal with them. So the new rule book. Well, the actual rule changes in the new version are probably not that extensive or wide-ranging, particularly, but the book itself does look quite different. This is the result of a substantial change of approach by World Athletics, as we've got to try and get used to calling them, and their kind of different is better approach to life. So basically, they've thrown everything up in the air and put it all on the internet in different categories, and only two of those categories, competition rules and technical rules, make it now into what we've become used to as their rule book. So we've had to do our best to work around that. Was a bit of a challenge because they didn't give us a lot of notice, and this came to us fairly late in the cycle. So apologies to everybody. If you already have a copy of the book or you already checked it out online, I would be sympathetic if your reaction was a bit Eric Morecambe-like, and you come to the conclusion that there's probably all the right rules in there, but not necessarily all in the right order. So we are where we are, and hopefully you will get used to the new layout before long. We have tried to make life as easy for you as we can, tried to help your navigation through the new book by incorporating not only a brief introduction right at the beginning of the book, but also some tables which contain the format changes of where you would now find the new rule, it's equivalent to the old rule. That will become more apparent as John gives you the detailed explanation that he'll be doing in a moment. So I think we will get used to it eventually, but for now it probably will take a little bit of adaptation. In addition to the structural changes, there have been one or two substantive world athletic changes. Again, John will pick out the most relevant of them. And there have also been some relevant changes to the UKA supplement. And most of those have resulted from the consultation process that we go through in the lead up to the new book. Again, John will take you through the main ones. So as Nikki's also said, as well as providing you with this summary, we also want to give you the opportunity to ask questions. Peter's going to be the main oral respondent to the questions once John's finished, and the rest of us will try and keep up with you on the chat box. So without any more ado, I'll hand over to John to expand further. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Tim. Just put my microphone on. Brief objectives there on that slide, and perhaps best to explain that I get this dubious responsibility of going through this, as I've had that duty of putting the rule book together and trying to achieve something that is easily usable by all officials and all athletes as well, as much as possible. We have faced a number of issues, as Tim mentions, and we will go through those. But this is what we're going to try and do. Is this webinar is primarily aimed at technical officials. There may be other people in it, and that's not a problem if they are. We will look at the structure of the new rule book and go into the detail. And as Tim says, we'll go into the questions later. Perhaps best to start this section by saying where we are at present in terms of the books. Some of you have got them, some of you won't. Most of you won't yet. The books have left the printers and they have been received at the 3 English Officials Associations, North, South and Midlands. They have gone out to England Athletics in time for distribution when England Athletics start to receive the annual affiliation fees, and they've also gone to Athletics Northern Ireland. Where they haven't gone to yet is Welsh Athletics and Scottish Athletics, where both offices are closed and they're unable to have anywhere to accept them. There's also a hold up on the retail sales page on the UKA website because the printers again they do the retailing for us, and they have a problem in staffing that duty. One day we'll get them out, not too exactly sure when it will be, but in the meantime they are available on the UK website, as many of you will have now seen. Where we've gone in structure, we started this process in 2016 of adapting the IAAF rules as it was then and adding the UK supplements. This is the 3rd version, and as Tim mentioned, they nearly tripped us up with it. We got the Word version on which we could start working at the beginning of December, which was the first information that we'd had that the structure had been changed into the format you've now seen. Prior to that, in July, August, IAAF, as they were then, had issued a summary of all the changes. Malcolm Rogers adapted that and it went out to all officials earlier this year. And that's the reason it hasn't got the new numbers in, because IAAF prepared it with the old numbers there. Those documents all on the website, ready for use, as well as having been circulated to the technical officials groups. As we have in the slide there, 2018-19, the old, very simple rules numbered 1 to 260. As we've discovered now for the 2020 edition, they have decided, or World Athletics decided, that they would split firstly into competition rules and secondly into technical rules. Competition rules include features such as licensing, detail in that area. Technical rules very much to do with the competition area. as Tim says, if you have any questions going on to that, then we will try to answer them as we move at the end of the day. The other feature that changed in our rulebook is because certain sections were dropped by World Athletics, and because there were sections that we have to have in UK rules, such as the eligibility sections, we have added a third section with a general section at the end of the rulebook, which does incorporate eligibility and other things that have been dropped by World Athletics, such as advertising regulations and rules about agents, which we felt were essential to keep in the UK version for one central point. The other part that we've done then refers to the appendices. The endurance appendix is the only part that's left. For the simplicity of reference, we have kept the numbers in there, so it's still 1, 2, 3, 4. But the ultra rules have gone into the general rules section of G9. The two official sections, agreed by TAG, the Technical Advisory Group, that it was no longer appropriate to have them in the rulebook, so they will be posted on the UK website when identifying the rules. Excuse me. We followed the usual process for adopting the rules. Started back in March, 12 months ago, ended in July 31st as far as proposals went, then went through it all, through the review consultation processes to achieve the versions that we have. As Tim mentioned, not too many significant changes this time, to certainly to the UKA supplements. They are there in sight. To differentiate the World Athletics rule books, sorry, I should be moving these on as we go, to identify the World Athletics changes, double vertical lines down the side of the page. As I mentioned earlier, that change summary was detailed to all officials. The one change that didn't go through in time to incorporate in the UKA book was the shoe rule that came after much controversy towards the end of the year. We finally saw that in the end of January, I believe, by which time we'd already put our book to print. So I have taken a copy of the IWF rule and posted it as a PDF on the UK website in the usual place. Items to note on the World Athletics rule changes, and Peter can probably address these better in the questions at the end. I'm not going to get involved in the technical side that I know nothing about at all. And I do believe that there are questions on particular sections, particularly about the long jumps, that will be discussed later. The one part on the under-18 steeplechase barrier, it had been intended to apply that from 1st of April 2020, but just proved totally impractical to ensure that all the stadia had that facility to be able to stage the competitions as required. So that under-18 steeplechase barrier rule has been deferred until April 2021. The UK supplement changes. You recall that we had the first version of this in 2016 in the blueprint, which proved to be quite difficult for many people to read, I understand, so we changed that to purple. That hasn't been commented on in the last 2 years, so we've retained the purple print for UK supplements and highlighted the changes by a single vertical line in the margin. Again, those changes are summarised in the papers that are available on the UK website. And unlike the IWF paper that came out, we have been able to cross-reference the current rule number, the new rule number, with the old one. changes.
John, sorry, before we go on, can you just move your papers away from your mic a bit, because it's
All
causing
right,
a bit
sorry.
of interference. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay. I can do that. Give me a chance to move the slide on as well then. Significant changes to the UK supplements. As I mentioned, nothing major, tidying up as much as anything. The competition year, for example, that's simply because the competition year rule was originally implemented and applied largely for track and field league competition that ran into September after the change of dates for age groups. But it did leave certain issues for road racing and cross-country racing. Road we changed a while ago to make the competition year 1st of September. We've now brought that into line for cross-country, so that cross-country events held in September are in the same competition year as the season that it's beginning. Other points to mention, perhaps, the higher competition foreign athlete registration. It was payable for the first 2 years of registration. We've dropped that now, so foreign athlete higher competition fees are only payable for the first year of registration, and then free after that, as long as the athlete continues with registering with the same club. The area championship relaxation. That's to say, in the past, any athlete who'd competed in the championships of one area couldn't compete in another one for a period of, was it 9 months or 12 months, not too sure. Now, the restriction is 9 months for competition within the same discipline. So it's possible to compete in cross-country in one area and then road in another area later on in the same year within the 9 months. The clothing rule is an increase in the maximum height to help clubs benefit from sponsorship if they're able to attract any for advertising on the vest for logos. But one word of caution on that is that those regulations are over and above what's allowed in IAAF and World Athletics competition. So anyone competing in World Athletics events in a club vest could have their vest blanked out. I think that covers the items on that one. Then on facilities and equipment, should be noted, if you're trying to get hold of Ed Hunt at the moment on any facilities and equipment issues, Ed is currently furloughed and not too sure when he'll be back on duty. What I would add for these lines is that once we get track and field licensing back underway, these issues of cages in particular, are being monitored for before any licenses for discus and hammer are issued. It wouldn't affect the rest of the license, of course, but it could be a restriction if cages don't meet the specification. You may also have heard the detail on track marking that it doesn't particularly come into rules, but just for information, track mark has been suspended now and is not being monitored for licensing later in events this year. And then the other one to mention is the pushed wheelchair and buggies. This has taken a long time to develop this particular rule. It was led by Run Britain. It has involved extremely wide consultation amongst the various groups and concluded with taking legal advice to make sure that nothing that has been said contravenes the Equality Act in any way. But Run Britain were particularly keen to ensure safety for all participants in road races. And so the ruling is that for events taking place on open roads open to traffic, then these conditions will apply. Don't apply in the same way for roads close to traffic, and they certainly don't apply to the fun run sections of races. It is purely for races that are held on roads open to traffic, and applying to pushed wheelchairs, buggies, wheelchair athletes, all that group. That very quickly is a rundown of the various issues that we've tried to incorporate, and I'm sure it's probably going to lead to more questions than I've answered on that. But move on to Peter now, if I may.
Thanks, John. I think I know many people are on the call. I'm conscious we've got some very experienced officials here. So if we get some questions from them, maybe I'll have some answers, help me with some of the answers too. Really, we had half a dozen questions submitted by lunchtime today, and I put together some slides on what we'll try and give by way of answers to those. And then if we've got any more coming in during the webinar, while I'm talking, John will try and answer them. If I see them coming up, I'll try and speak to them as well, if it's not disrupting the flow too much. But as Nikki said, we can put some FAQs together towards the end. So first question, I think as John indicated before, was actually for a rule that doesn't come into force until October, at least October is the current date. So for outdoor competitions, not really until next year. Obviously, it could apply to indoor as well. And we got really two types of question. I think the first one, we had a couple of questions, one from John Morland, one for Andrew Hulse. So if they're both on the call, thank you for those. That was really about the use of technology. And as you'll be aware from, if you've had a chance to look at the summary of changes or indeed the new book, World Athletics are trying to encourage the use of technology. And in conjunction with that, the rule has actually changed in terms of what's a foul. Instead of actually having to touch the ground beyond the takeoff board, you just have to break the plane of the takeoff board for it to be a foul. So that's really where the technology comes in. And the question really was, while we understand that may be become common at the very top level, Diamond League, major championships, do we have any sense as to how far that's going to filter down? I've had a few conversations with people. I've talked to some of the guys at Precision Athletics. I think a couple of people on the call, if they're on, Steve Marshall and Andrew Hulse, I think have also been taking a look at this. I don't pretend to be a technical expert on this aspect of this, but really the challenge seems to be not around so much just having some kind of camera that will capture the image. The issue is very much around how do we integrate that capturing of the image with the competition as a whole, because clearly it could be quite disruptive. People have to stop and go and look at a video if somebody protests a decision. Similarly, if we don't find out until the end of the competition, it could really disrupt the competition itself. And I would add this rule's pretty much been in its current form in place for American collegiate competition for a number of years. And talking to some American coaches that I've met when they've been over here, it has caused a lot of disruption with, for example, somebody producing a big jump in round one, then having 5 fouls, thinking they won the competition with a first round jump, and then somebody produces some footage to show that was a foul too. So I think that's one of the major challenges. I think one of the other big challenges is that for domestic competition, probably not too bad for long jump, but for triple jump, if you're using 2 or even 3 boards, trying to move the equipment around to cater for that, I just don't see how that would work. So I think there are some people who are trying to produce some solutions on this. I get the impression that it should be possible for the equipment concerned, which will be potentially a laser beam, potentially a camera, to be available for hiring in the same way that EDM is. But it's obviously come to a bit of a halt with the current lockdown. So yeah, we may start to see some of these things at area, county, maybe upper reaches of the leagues, but I think it's going to take time to filter in. The other main question was around the plasticine boards, and this is around the fact that the angle of the plasticine board is now being adjusted to 90 degrees. If you look at the guidance from the PDF document that John mentioned that's on the UKA website, you can see there's a response that's come from essentially the technical advisory group, the TAG, and they appear to be rather discouraging the use of plasticine. I think custom and practice will emerge in terms of whether people are doing things completely by eye or whether they want to use the plasticine. I know one of the submissions to the consultation expressed concern that even with only being 7 millimeters, somebody might take off in a legal way behind the plane of the board, but still somehow catch the lip of the plasticine. Again, I think that needs to be tested in practice. In terms of whether a facility needs to go out and buy new boards, I don't think they should have to. But I think if they want to do things by eye, it may be that they want to actually have something that is more flush with the board. But I don't personally see a need for that. I know that question came from Andrew. If Andrew thinks otherwise, please type in a comment. I'm happy to defer if you got better information on that. The throws cages one, and this came from John Morland. John's covered this a bit, but the question really was, how much do officials actually have to check when they get to a facility and look at the cage and try and figure out what they've got? I think the answer is really in two parts. Firstly, if you look at some of the guidance that's been on the UKA website, there have been some transitional arrangements in place. I'm not quite sure now how long those are going to run. They were potentially going to run for most of this summer season. If the cage hadn't been modified, there was going to be a requirement for venue-specific risk assessments to be done. The other side of it is that for the licensing process that John mentioned, before the license is issued, people will be checking within the licensing team whether the cage is currently compliant. And I've given a reference on the UKA website, but essentially if you go to the facilities page, you may have discovered there is a map of the UK, which you can expand and then click on individual tracks. And that will then show you what the degree of certification of the track is, in particular what the compliance of the throws cage is. So if you want to have a look in advance, you can have a bit of an idea. In terms of checking by the officials on the day, I would say the implication at least is do what you've always done, check for holes in the netting, but also look at the signage. And if we go to the next page, I think you may or may not be able to see this clearly. This will be familiar to quite a lot of people who've been to facilities where the cage has been upgraded. I think this particular one was done on the existing cage at Kings Meadow, as it used to be called. And that will give you some idea as to whether the thing has been done. And it will also give some guidance as to where the gate positions should be. So I think the main things to check are around the integrity of the cage and the gate position. But it should be obvious from the signage, and if you looked at the website beforehand, as to whether the cage has been done. I can see there's been some typing going on about the boards. I think there may be from Andrew. I couldn't quite spot who said that, which is the profile needs to have changed on the plasticine. If we just go back to that one for a second, I know from talking to John Askew that he has come up with a new tool which could potentially mold the plasticine to 90 degrees. From what I've seen, and this again is something that hasn't come in anger yet, that ought to be able to produce the result with the existing board, where it's one that's been notched out at the corner, where it's a board that's just sloping at 45 degrees or whatever, I can see that could be a problem. I can see another question says, as this fundamentally alters the distances with the different measurement systems, will there be two listed performances? And sorry, I think that's for the combined events. That's a different question. I'll leave John to field the chat ones because it's a bit hard to multitask to that extent. So back to the next area, and we had a question, I think, here from George Mackay. And this is around Technical Rule 3 or 3.6 specifically, which refers to the fact that the World Athletics Council is going to approve some regulations in terms of eligibility for athletes in certain categories. And essentially that is transgender athletes and for athletes whose sex development is the term that they use, maybe sort of non-STAD. And I guess we're looking at the sort of Caster Semenya type situation. Those regulations have been published on the website of the World Athletics, so you can read them. This is obviously a highly controversial area. You've only got to pick up the Sunday Times most weeks, and it's one of the topics that the press talk about. Clearly, this hasn't been resolved at a global level yet. I think we can only try and apply what IAAF or World Athletics have put out. In terms of more domestic side of things, I've had one or two questions locally about transgender athletes. There is a useful document, in fact, two documents that are on the UKA website. Apologies for that. Somehow my phone is ringing as well. I didn't think that could happen the way I'd set it up. I think that's gone away. Apologies for that. Yeah, the policy document on the UK website. I think that's quite helpful. I think the main message from that is read the policy documents, and if you've got questions, contact UKA Welfare. Their details are there on the website. David Brown and his team, I'm sure, will give some helpful guidance on that. But there are two documents. There's the policy itself, and there is kind of a set of guidance notes designed for clubs. And I think that's probably of more use to the audience we've got on this call at the moment. Then we had another couple of questions about the structure. I think John's partially dealt with these, but we did have a question from Mike Oakley on this, which is why have the appendices been taken out and where can they be found? I think it's a couple of things. I think this ultimately came from the TAG, the Technical Advisory Group. I think firstly they were keen to include the whole of that section that sort of follows the old Rule 125 that lists out the various duties. Not all of those have been included in the two previous editions of the combined IAAF UK book. But the fact that they wanted really to include the whole thing, I think, is a step forward. So in terms of the two appendices, the pathway stuff, I think, is pretty well dealt with other information that's on the education and training part of the website already. I think that there may be some changes that the TAG want to make to that, but I think most of the information that you want is there. In terms of Appendix 3, which was the appointment of duties of and selection of officials, a lot of that's in the new C section, Rules 3 to 30. I think what might be helpful at some future point, maybe this will come out from TAG in due course, is perhaps some guidance, maybe by way of UKA supplements, in terms of which of those roles you'd expect to see at an international level meeting are not really required at UK level. So I think there'll probably be some additional material going on that probably education and training part of the website. I think quite a lot of the information is probably embedded within the slides that are there for certainly level 1 courses, and probably to a lesser extent level 4. So I think most of the information's out there. It's probably more in the education and training type areas. Then again, we had just a general question about rationale behind the changing of the rule numbers. I think again, John's talked about this. To be honest, I don't think we've really been given an explanation by World Athletics. It came as a bit of a surprise, to be honest. I think what we really said on the slide earlier, I think it's basically they wanted to look at the whole of their library of rules and regulations and put everything in within one structure. Why they felt it necessary to separate out those two bits, I don't know. The fact is they've done it, and we've just got to cope with it. I think it would have been impossible if we'd tried to stick with the old structure. It would have been incredibly confusing. I think one other question was actually pointing out one or two typos. I think there is one on page 198 where it says trails rather than trials in terms of practice before competition. Again, it's been a less than straightforward process, really cutting and pasting the World Athletics stuff into our text. John's done a fantastic job trying to make it as consistent as possible. I think one or two gremlins like that have crept in. I think we can probably change the version on the website. Hopefully there aren't too many others, but if there are, please email John, and he'll put an amending note on the website in due course. So those are the questions that we've had in advance. It's been quite hard to track any ones that have been coming through. Nikki, I think you may have had a few questions that came in after we kind of had to close things off around about lunchtime today. Do you want to just take us through those, or anything else that you want to highlight from what's come through the process?
So I'll go through the questions that had been submitted a bit later on in the day. How much difference do you think the changes within the javelin spec will have on domestic competition? I know of a young lad who has bought 700 javelins, and he's worried he won't be able to use them in competitions.
Thanks for that. I very much doubt it will be a problem. Again, there may be others on the call who are closer to this than me. The changes that were made were around the centre of gravity, and they were tiny differences between what was under the old UKA rulebook and the IAAF. They are very, very small differences. I think generally when I have javelins brought in, an awful lot of them say meets IAAF specifications. So I would have thought they would already be compliant with that. I'm afraid offhand I can't remember exactly what the differences were. I think it's something that people knew about for a while. It was really a piece of tidying up. I would very much doubt any javelins would be rejected as a result of that. The FAQs we will actually put what the actual difference was. There's probably a level of detail. It was hard to get into these presentation slides, but I'd be amazed if anybody had a javelin that was previously compliant that isn't now. Steve Marshall has asked, at most league competitions, would COG actually be checked, centre of gravity? Possibly not. It depends on the equipment officer, technical manager. I usually do for the private implements. If time, I do it for the stadium implements as well. Hopefully that that deals with. Mike Oakley says yes, he would do so at Ipswich. So we've all read that one. Nikki, do you want to go on to the next question?
Yes, there's one from John Driscoll further up, and it relates to high jump. So it would be useful to get some clarification in how the high jump bed height rule will be enforced. I couldn't find anything against the interim fix for club and county events regarding increasing the height of pallets underneath the bed. This would obviously put the top of the bed at the right height, but wouldn't give the same flexibility. Any thoughts?
Thanks for that, John. Again, some of the senior technical managers on the call will maybe put me right. My understanding is it's actually the depth of the bed itself, not the pallets, that is the relevant measurement. I think on the old version of the rule book, there was a supplement in there that said 60 centimeters was allowable. Basically, that supplement's been taken out. And that was really, I think that came largely from advice from Ed Hunt, that this is quite a key safety dimension. So I think the height of the pallet, I think, is irrelevant, is my understanding with that. If anyone disagrees, please type a message to that effect. Do you want to go into the next question, Nikki?
Yeah. Multi-events, page 293, 39.13, has tie break been removed? So that's if two or more athletes achieve an equal number of points for any place in the competition, it shall be determined as a tie.
I think that had already been removed. Steve Marshall has very helpfully typed in, yes, went away in the last rule book. Thank you for that, Steve.
I'm just having a look. So page 199, general 25.3.3 is this new not seen markers put in at 0.5 meters from 2.5 meters and 1 meter from 5 meters.
This is for the pole vault, is it?
I think so, yes.
To say, my hard copy of the rule book literally dropped through my letterbox at 3:30 this afternoon, so I'm still getting used to that. It is a lot easier than scrolling up and down on a tablet. Page 199. Yes, it is pole vault. Now that's been with us for a while, and indeed, when I was Steve Marshall has confirmed that. Certainly, when I was on the technical team working with Steve as technical manager, I was one of the clerks at the anniversary game this year. We did it, and it should be done at all meetings because it has been in the rule book for a little while.
I think that's everything that I've been sent, unless anyone else has got anything they quickly want to put in the chat box before we finish. I'm just scrolling up to see if there's anything that I've missed. And I think that's everything.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Well, I'll hand back to you now, then, Nikki, just to close things off and explain again what happens next.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, so for those that have joined a bit later on, if by any chance any of your questions have been missed, whether that was through emailing me or on the chat function tonight, I will come back to you individually with the answer, but we'll also be putting together an FAQ document which lists all of the questions and answers that have been asked. And the recording of the webinar this evening will be available on the England Athletics website. So I hope you all found that useful. We're going to be doing a series of webinars over the next few weeks for officials. So hopefully you will find something else that is of interest to you. I hope you've, all, like I said, all found it useful. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And like I said, anything that's been missed, please contact me directly and I'll get back to you. John, Peter and Tim, I don't know whether you've got any further comments.
I just endorse what Nikki said, and we've reached out to several dozen people tonight. I think the important thing is, when you're able to have your own networks locally. Obviously, at the moment, that has to observe social distancing, but do please help the officials in your area when things come to life. Try and give them some explanations to how this works, and keep up the good work. And
from me, just to repeat, if anybody has any points, any questions that they have to raise, you can get me on either my jtemperton@uka.org.uk or rules@uka.org.uk at any time. Thank you.
From me, just thanks again to everybody for taking the time this evening. And I think I'd like to thank John for the enormous amount of work that he puts in on this 2-year cycle and has done for many years to make sure that this book appears every 2 years. Thanks, John. It's much appreciated.
Fab. Okay. Have a nice evening, everyone, and look after yourselves. Thank you.